What's up, YouTube? It's your boy AP, and today we're making a finalized endgame build guide for PConc Bouncing Scavenger for the Freesia event. We're currently sitting at 25 million dot damage. We have a Phys max hit of a whopping 125,000. And just for reference, even a 40,000 Phys max hit is considered extremely good. So this build is very tanky, and we do have similar max hits for the LE damage as well. How are we accomplishing such crazy damage? Well, this build is unique in that it's able to shift 100% of Phys damage onto fire, and we can quite easily cap our fire res to 90 without even using rare jewels. It's as simple as a belt craft, a helmet craft, and a boot craft. And just for the record, we're not even making use of a mage blood, but you could use one to even more easily hit the 90 fire res cap. Now, we're not simply shifting Phys damage onto this 90 fire res. We're also shifting 90% of our lightning and cold damage as well, which is why we're able to avoid a lot of the penetration mechanics of bosses, as well as stuff like Simulacrum, to just have an overall well-rounded, extremely tanky character that can still dish out a lot of damage. So this video is going to be focused mostly on this defensive package, how we can attain the swap, the 3 pieces of gear you have to craft. Now you can expect to spend ballpark maybe 10 divines per piece. Some might end up costing more, some might end up costing less. I'm not too sure, but I spent around that much per piece of gear. And I will go over the entire crafting process. Actually, this will be found on my VODs channel. There will be a link in the pinned comment that just shows me making all the crafts cut up off of the Twitch stream for you guys to follow along with. All right, this is going to be the last video of PConc Bouncing because I do consider this to be min-maxed and all content viable. And yeah, I don't think we need to release any more videos on this. But if you do have more aspirations past this already pretty crazy level, feel free to join the Discord. We do have a PConc section in there where everybody's, sharing sort of their deviations from my build. There's a lot of different ways you can go, but I think what we're sharing here is fundamentally very strong defensively, very strong offensively, and it's a good baseline for you to experiment off of. All right, let's get into the video. I'm going to jump right into all the different boxes we have to check that work together synergistically in order to achieve such a crazy defensive package. And I should note, this video is not going to rehash everything else in the build series, such as how we scale the damage, how to calculate the damage. So if you're just jumping in at this point, there is a playlist in the video description where you can just scroll back on the channel, and that'll cover how to scale your damage. It'll just cover all the previous stuff that we're not touching on here. But first of all, for this defensive package, we need to convert 100% of Phys damage to fire. And why is this so important? This is because a standard build that uses other forms of defense, such as armor, is going to be very weak towards boss Phys max hits, because really high Phys max hits are not mitigated very well with armor. So if we're converting all the Phys damage to 90% fire resistance, we're only taking 10% of any Phys damage no matter what. And that's why our Phys max hit is 5, if not greater than 5 times the value of an average endgame build. 127,000 is just unheard of almost. All right, so to get that full conversion, the first 40% is done through our ascendancy called Cloak of Flame. It's the second one you choose. And if we turn this off, I can just show you what a huge impact 100% conversion is. We're at roughly 128,000. If we only have 60% conversion, we go down to 40,000, which is honestly still very good, but this is triple that. So your ascendancy gives you 40%. The next 40% is gotten through Cloak of Flames, because you can actually equip a Cloak of Flames as well as get the Cloak of Flame ascendancy. The final 20% is from a perfectly rolled Dawnbreaker. Now that we have the 100% Phys converted to fire, we want to get the max value out of this, so we need to scale our fire resistance all the way up to 90%, which is the cap. So as you can see here, we have 83%. However, when I press the Ruby flask, it will go all the way up to 90%. And we are investing a lot in flask sustain, so this should be completely permanent. How are we getting the 90%? That's through 3 different item crafts. And the pinned comment is, as I said previously in the video, going to link to a video on my second channel where you can watch me craft each one of these pieces of gear. You will realistically not be able to shop for these because these are pretty unique crafts specifically to enable this build. If it's on the market, it's because somebody else crafted it for profit to sell to you guys. Okay, so the first piece of gear is the helmet. And what you absolutely have to have on this is +2 to level of socketed AoE gems. And you get that through a Veiled Orb on the prefix. This is sort of a complicated craft, so I do recommend following along on the VOD's channel while you craft it yourself. So the +2 to level socketed AoE gems means we're going to put our 4 link of auras in the helmet: Grace, Enlighten, Malevolence, Purity of Fire. Now, Purity of Fire by default will give you 4% at level 21. However, when you boost it to 23, it'll give you 5%. And we get enough increased aura effect on the tree to boost this now to 6%. So we're getting 6 out of the 15 max res from this helmet combined with level 21 Purity of Fire. Now the next part is the boots. These are just standard ailment immune boots. I do have a video crafting guide on this in the playlist as well. But the main thing here is we need to use Orb of Conflicts to get +2 to maximum fire resistance. Now this is the 5th level, so you do have to conflict this up. You can't just use an Eldritch currency. And you can see the process of doing this again in that video. So now we have 8% total maximum fire res. We need to get 7% more. So the Ruby Flask by default gives you 5% max fire res. However, when we combine this with a Microdistillery belt, which gives us 30% increased effect, this will now boost it up to 7%, and we're able to fully cap at 90% without having to resort to any rare jewels. Now you could get +2 fire res from a rare jewel. However, we don't really want to be using rare jewels because if you look at the build's spec, the only rare jewels are the cluster jewels. For all the normal jewel sockets, we are filling them with pretty powerful unique jewels. Watcher's Eye, this is another part of the defensive combo which we'll touch on. Ancestral Vision gives us ailment immunity. Light of Meaning is a lot of damage. Balance of Terror, in my opinion, is a must. It's just so much damage. Lethal Pride, another part of the defensive combo. And, well, not everyone will be able to afford an Impossible Escape. It is very powerful to be able to travel up here and grab these nodes. However, I suppose you could opt to use 2% fire res there instead if you wanted to. But I think these are accessible enough crafts that you will not have to do this. Anyways, that is the second part of the defensive layer. The first part was 100 Phys to fire. The second part is 90 to max fire res. The third part is going to be converting as much cold and lightning damage as possible onto our fire resistance for 2 main reasons. The first one's quite obvious. We already have 90 fire res. We might as well capitalize on this by shifting as much damage onto that as possible because we're only going to take 10%. However, another huge advantage that I'd say is even more important is that we're dodging penetration now. Because if you're fighting something like Shaper, which has a bunch of cold penetration, but you shift the cold damage onto fire damage, now you just completely ignore that penetration. And this is also going to work wonders on Simulacrum waves, which do give a lot of penetration modifiers. So how are we able to shift our damage from cold and lightning onto fire? The first one is just baked into the Dawnbreaker shield. It can roll up to 20% of lightning and cold as fire. So you are going to have to spend a little bit to get a perfect roll here, but that's the first 20% right there. The next 20% is from a Watcher's Eye mod. You can get up to 20% of cold and lightning damage affected by purity fire. So right there, that's a total of up to 40% if you get max rolls. And now we're going to use a Lethal Pride, which is the Rockiata version. And that is going to give us Tempered by War, which gives 50% of cold and lightning damage taken as fire damage. So we are able to quite easily shift 90% of cold and lightning damage onto fire damage. Now, Tempered by War does have the downside of 50% less cold and 50% less lightning resistance. So you're going to have to pay a lot of investment to get these up to fully capped at 75%. So much so that I don't even think it's worthwhile, because you have to understand, if you are fully invested in this, you're only taking 10% of the damage onto your lightning and cold resistances. You could maybe opt for a Bismuth Flask. I do have some LE res on a suffix. So I am 90 fire res, 70 cold res, 35 lightning res. And as you can see, going from 70 to 35, your max hit goes from 110,000 down to 90,000. So even sitting at quite a low lightning resistance, we're still 90,000 max hit. And this is better because you're not seeing the penetration defensive layer here. This is assuming it was just ignoring penetration. However, other builds, their max hits are going to get drastically messed up when they deal with penetration. We completely bypass that. So just keep in mind, a huge part of this defensive layer is that LE shift to ignore penetration, which you can't really see in a build, and most builds don't do this. It's already pretty good values on the PoB, but it's actually even better in practice. Okay, so I think we can touch on a few extra things here. While you're shopping for your Lethal Pride, you do want to get one that gives a bunch of strength, because this build needs strength. I actually don't have any strength on any of my gear, and we're still able to get 159 strength because this gives me so much. We go from 90 to 160. And that's because every little small node does give strength. However, I also have a big node that gives 20 strength. Another thing you could look for in a Lethal Pride would be chance to gain endurance charge on kill. Now, I normally recommend anointing Aggressive Bastion, which is 10% chance to gain endurance charge on kill. But we hit so frequently, even 5% is good enough. So since I have that, I free up this anoint. I'm able to grab Swift Venoms, which is just so much damage. It's attack speed and dot multi, the two best damage scalers. So that would be like the ideal Lethal Pride, just a bunch of strength, endurance charge on kill. Now, unrelated to this whole setup, but another really big synergy that most people don't realize is Microdistillery Belt has a really big synergy with the Life Flask. So what this reads is you can't use the flask in the 5th slot. So as you can see, well, you can't really see, my face is blocking it. I actually don't have a button to press the Life Flask. It is impossible to press this Life Flask. When we use our PConc, it will still pull charges from this flask. So this is still increasing our damage. The way you know how much damage you're getting is you just divide the number by 5. So 5,100 damage is going to be we're getting flat like 1,200 just for reference there. And since we're never pressing this flask, we can actually take this synergy a step further and go to the bench and craft on max charges. So now instead of having 45 charges, we have 145 charges to make the sustain so much better. That's a little tip here. We're sort of ignoring a bunch of downsides and just getting the upsides. All right, yeah, that is the defensive package. And I guess that sort of wraps up this series. Big shout out to Rutu for putting the initial PoB together that was showcasing this, and now we've put it into practice on a fully fleshed out endgame character. All right, other things to note. In the PoB I'm linking, there is a Progenesis. Now, I just haven't been farming that much, so I don't currently have that, but I do want to include it in the PoE because it's a no-brainer. If you can afford a Progenesis, you are going to slot it in there. So for example, my current character, the max hits, they're still very good. We're dropping from 127 down to 93. It's more than enough, but yeah, you know, once I am able to afford that, we might put that on. And yeah, that wraps up this series. Really happy with how PConc Scav turned out in the Fresi event. The defensive layer is completely unparalleled. The explosions baked into the Ascendancy is wild. It makes mapping feel crazy. And yeah, I'll still be streaming this on Twitch because, I mean, I don't really have enough currency to roll a second build yet. So I'm honestly being gatekept by idols. I want to do some of the really tough Rogue Exile strats, but the idols for that are pretty expensive. So we'll be farming our way towards those idols, doing some real juicer strats, and then probably re-rolling a second character at some point. All my investment's going to go either towards idols or towards saving up for another character. All right, hope you enjoyed tagging along for this build series, and I'll see you live on Twitch. All right, take care.